There was an article on NPR that talked about a conspiracy against hip hop, and it was rumblings. It says in 2012, an unsigned letter began circulating on popular hip hop blogs describing a meeting that allegedly happened about 20. Make sure I got my paper right. 20 years earlier.
Popular hip hop blogs.
What did I say?
That's what you said.
Yeah, that's what they said. Long circulating on popular hip hop blogs.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say there probably weren't popular hip hop blogs, but we continue.
I see where you're going. That's what they said. Long popular hip hop blogs. And it says
superhiphopunderground.com is not a. Yeah. Anyways,
I see where you're going. It happened.
You didn't subscribe to shotsfired.com?
It says it happened 20 years earlier between private prison and music industry executives, according to this letter. And let me make sure I'm reading right because my copy and paste game is whack. Record execs were asked to begin marketing and promoting hip hop that glorified criminal behavior in exchange for stock and private business. So the question they posed was, what does this conspiracy theory suggest about the relationship between hip hop and America's prison system over the last 40 years? So that being said, you guys heard me ask a question. You think there's any validity to this? And how do you feel about just
what's the actual question though? Like what are they not the question, like what are they stating is the conspiracy?
Yeah,
exactly.
Can I jump in, Mike? I can kick this off.
Go ahead, Spoolz.
Sure.
Okay, so I've read a lot about this, man, and just real quick too, there's what Mike's talking about. There's a podcast on NPR they just started called Louder Than a Riot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there's an episode about this, and it's good. And then the second episode is about Mac from No Limit, and that's supposed to be a 2 or 3 part one. But that's the only 2 they've put out so far. Really good show. Again, Louder Than a Riot. Shout to NPR. I don't think it's like too far fetched at the end of the day. And Sean, to answer your question, just kind of delve deeper into it. So the idea was that these record execs met with people who were owners or who were influential in the prison industrial complex. That was the meeting. And
okay.
The people from the prison industrial complex essentially suggested, if you can, have more violent music, as a part of your label, then these things will make infiltrate through society, and society will be more violent, and more people will go to jails and prisons, and we'll make more money, and then you'll make more money, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the general, I guess, idea.
Okay.
At least as I see it. Could be missing something there, but again, this is supposed to be like 92 when the meeting supposedly took place, or early 90s, right? And you see that surge of, some of it existed before then, but you see a change in hip hop. I think so, right? Not far after that. Especially in popular hip hop or rap. It's interesting. The only thing I'll say about the podcast, but like Nelson George gets interviewed and Killer Mike gets interviewed heavily in this episode. But they asked both of them what they thought. And Nelson George, if you guys are familiar, should be, if not. But he was like, they're like, do you think that it really? He's like, hell no. He was like, the level of concerted effort and planning and timing and coordination and all that shit it would take to do something like that, he was like, no. But Mike, on the other hand, was like, kind of more along the lines of what I think, like, yeah, it's possible, man. Now, one good point about this is that because of the way our nation has treated Black people, like it throughout time, like it's not. I hate when people simply dismiss it as a conspiracy theory, because shit like crazier shit has happened to Black people or influenced Black society or Black people.
The Tuskegee experiment.
That was true. Yeah, that's an example. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, man, but it's.
And you're hitting on why I asked the specifics of the question. So
yeah, go ahead, Sean.
No, that was it right there. It was like, well, are we talking about a conspiracy, or are we talking about some shit that's very possible, but there's no like evidence? You know what
else I've heard it compared to is the Willie Lynch speech or writing, one or the other. I've heard it compared to that, but which is interesting in itself to compare, like that comparison. But
no, well, the way he's putting it, because I wasn't hip to this whole letter thing that came out or meeting, whatnot. But how he's explaining it, it pretty much sounds like the Willie Lynch letter or experiment, and that has been debunked at time to time and stated that it was an urban myth or a conspiracy as well. And this kind of sounds similar to it, but in this country, it's weird that when you hear things like this, that you can't really dismiss it because it's true to a lot of the bullshit that goes on behind the scenes. You know what I'm saying? Like you'll get some shit that doesn't sound right, or I don't know if y'all remember when all of a sudden all the black artists were in the Illuminati and there was these secret record label rituals going on, but the only people that was mentioned that were in Illuminati were like Kanye and Jay-Z and Beyonce, and you had all these other artists that have been around forever. Those happen to be the ones that are in the Illuminati. You know what I'm saying? So
Spoolz say,
I've just heard people try to talk about blood sacrifices.
Yeah, all of that stuff, and some of that stuff's kind of coming back to light now in the political realm, but I won't get into that. But I mean, it doesn't sound too far fetched with them trying to do something like that, but with it being the 90s, I can see them using music as a tool to just get rich off as a whole and just not care about what the outcome is. I can see that, but
yeah, I
don't
agree
know
with
about
that.
the rest of it because I'm not hip to it. I'll have to check it out.
Well, there's a lot that it implies, right? It implies that this music is going to have an incredible influence on young people, especially young black people or young people of color. Like that's a pretty big assumption. Now, there's always been, flower children who listen to the mamas and the papas in the 60s, or like, deadheads or hard rock dudes, or not just dudes, but hard rock, people who are into really hard rock. Like that's always existed, but it's not like a tremendously massive amount of people, and it's all done to a varying degree within that larger group. And by that, I mean, some people dress the part and are fans of the music, but they're not out there, going nuts and, fucking fighting people and mosh, you know what I mean? Just shit like that. There's varying degrees of it. And like one thing this implies is that somehow rap and hip hop was going to have that wide of an influence. Not only that wide, but that like, I'm trying to think of like the right word for intrusive. You know what I mean? Like within people's lives. Like to me, it implies that. So part of me is kind of like, yeah, I don't know about all this because like that's not.
Yeah, because when
you're talking about controlling people at the end of the day,
even when you think about
controlling their behavior through music, right?
Even when you think about the early 90s and such, hip hop was kind of like the stepchild of the music industry as a whole. Like we weren't invited, or they weren't invited to award shows, or if they received an award, it was during when it wasn't being taped. It wasn't on the radio a whole lot. I mean, it was on the radio, but now the whole format is based around hip hop now. So it's kind of weird that this was happening in the early 90s. How it took this long for it to be prominent in the forefront.
Right.
I don't put it past anybody though. It sounds far-fetched, but at the same time, like I said, in the United States, anything is possible as far as manipulation.
And you see that, and then you see that coupled or alongside at that time in the early 90s into the mid 90s, this crazy prison reform and these crack laws and all this shit that went right in line with what was being rapped about and talked about, which goes in line with this like supposed meeting or whatever. Like it's interesting in that regard, man. And that's not to say that music doesn't. I didn't want to say music doesn't have influence before, because I think it does.
Huge influence.
But to have this level of it, I mean, the level of it that seems to be, at least I inferred that they were talking about in this meeting. At least per this letter, is tough. But I don't know. Who knows?
Now that you know where we're coming from with this in terms of the question that was posed, like, does that change? Do you have any feelings about it? Just the possibility of it?
It's still one of those things. Like I think it depends on what exactly we're talking about. Like I think Brad Spoolz brought up a good point about everything that it would imply around it. I think that there's stuff that I wouldn't really consider conspiracy theories. Like when we talk about private prisons and we talk about the prison industrial complex and the way things are set up, like there are definitely Americans that don't believe any of that stuff is real. You know what I mean? So that's where I kind of got like confused a little bit. Like, are we talking like that's a conspiracy theory, or are we talking about people are sacrificing lambs in executive buildings? And like
it's just,
the lambs part and all that shit's like, I don't know, man, and I don't really care. But the other stuff, but the other stuff like is important. And I'm curious, like if something came out about something more specific about a secret meeting or something, or I mean, it doesn't seem too far-fetched, but at the same time,
that's
it's
what
like,
I'm saying. You think about music, when you think about music though, and you think about how things evolved, evolution, de-evolution, however you want to call it, whatever, however you want to put it, like think about some of the things that we started to hear in music moving forward, and then you go back to this concept about what it will, quote unquote, I don't want to say make them do, or I don't want to do brainwash, but influence, I guess, is a word that we've been using. Think about some of the subject matter. You go back and think about that, the concept of that meeting, it's not that far-fetched. But to everyone else's point, it's like, I don't know. And then Lone brings in the lambs part. I get you. I feel you. I got friends that swear up and down by this. They're not, that are not on the fence at all. So I get it.
Well, this is the thing. If this was a conspiracy that they tried to implement in the early 90s, then they did kind of a poor job of it, because if you really look at the crime statistics compared from the 90s compared to now, like as much as they like to use Chicago as this example, as this crazy boogeyman to always say, well, these are the problems of Black America. Chicago in 2020 is nothing compared to what it was in 1992 as far as the violence is concerned.
We heard you looking for Candyman, bitch.
Sorry. Yeah, exactly. There you go. I remember like in the summers, living in St. Louis, where like there was a real thing. Should we continue to tell people how many people have been murdered in the city of St. Louis? Because do we really want to keep to encourage that? Because as bad as it still is, St. Louis still has its issues. It's nothing like it was in the 90s, and then at the same time, no one wants to talk about how, there are more Black men graduating from college. There are more Black women starting businesses than there have been at any other time in history. And, there's this, it's easy to say, okay, well, hip hop got all gangster, and then that was the downfall of Black people, and it sent all these Black people to prison. And I understand, because trust me, I'm a conspiracy dude. Like if you have a good conspiracy, I will sit and listen to you. But if you want to tell me that this whole thing started in 1992, I remember, radio stations saying, we're not going to play. This is at the height of Snoop Dogg, saying we're not going to play anything by Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre. These were Black radio stations headed by Black program directors that made a concerted effort not to play this particular music. And, while it still broke through and Snoop is the star that he is today, because of whatever factors that you would like to belie that on, like you have to think about, hip hop is as a whole, like, like if it was all about quote unquote gangsterism, then how does Will Smith sell 13 million records? How does Lauryn Hill win, 5 Grammys? How does
let me ask you a question though. Let me ask you a question as a rebuttal, as a rebuttal to that. Take the sales out of it. Take the sales out of it and go strictly to the influence piece. Do you think it's far-fetched to say that hip-hop music as it evolved could be super influential and have a direct effect and influence on all the killings that you were talking about in St. Louis? Do you think Sounds like you think that's not.
You could say that because I remember there was time where people were getting charged up off of watching Colors and Boys in the Hood.
Okay.
But then I also remember there was a time where like hip hop got back into its aspirational bag.
Okay.
Like people wanted to be fly. People wanted to have nice things. They didn't want to wear, you know, the khaki t-shirts, and they wanted to come out and have the Versace suits, you know, and you can say that there's a certain negative element to that as well. But at the same time, like, if you just want gangster rap, really, quote unquote, at its height, had a very short run. You know, if you really want to talk about, you know, the most gangster of gangster, yo, we just out here in low riders and drinking 40s and, you know, doing this, that, and the third, the hoes. You know, that was if you want to talk about, you know, even when you talk about somebody like 50 Cent who sold all those records, he made records about going to the club, having a good time. He had girl records like this, you know. Yeah, there was a gangster element to it, but the reason why it worked and why he sold so many records is because he had that, you know, pop mass appeal. So when people say, "Oh yeah, this whole gangster element to the music," like, honestly, that's such a small part of, and this is coming from somebody who worked in radio. I actually got to see behind the curtain, if you will. And I've told
Jay, what if the people you're talking about that are behind the curtain weren't in the other secret meetings that were being had?
Well, you know, maybe they didn't call it. Maybe everybody wasn't CC'd. Not, you know, the people I was in the meetings with were not properly CC'd.
But there could be levels of secret meetings. You know,
there's levels to the lambs, brother. There's levels to the lambs.
But you know, my whole thing is, and I've told this story many times, is like, you know, if it was about this quote unquote gangsterism, like, the thing is, all these media companies, they go through all their research, and all their research is directed towards women. Like the research that says, hey, guys really like this particular record. Like, I saw my program director pick up the men's research and drop it in the trash can, because we don't care what men like. If women don't like it, it doesn't get played on your TV, on your radio, or in the club. So, I mean, I see where I you know, like I said, I'm conspiracy dude. I see where this could make sense to some people, but just knowing a little bit about the game and actually looking at statistics and understanding exactly how this doesn't really line up with where Black people actually are in America. For all of our problems, the things that we have excelled at, you know, if this was a conspiracy, they did a piss poor job at it.
If you've enjoyed this segment of the New Old Heads podcast, make sure to join our live show every Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern at twitch.tv/bringingdowntheband, and join our private Discord community with talks on hip-hop, music, news, and everything else.